Hey everybody, I'm Gentleman Alcoholic.
Hi, John.
Hi all you sweet people.
John,
Makes me wanna go through all the pages of folks and take a gander. Like we've really done this for a couple of months now, haven't we? Um, so um, what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. My sobriety date is November 27th of 2000. Um, it happens to also be 3 days after my belly button birth date. Um, I was born on Thanksgiving weekend, and so every year, um, birthdays weren't necessarily a big deal in my house because they always fell on Thanksgiving, and so there wasn't a whole lot of celebration. And I remember very early on copping quite the big resentment and was always woe is me about my birthday. Um, but this particular last drunk that I had back in 2000 was on a Sunday evening, and I had a couple of really close friends with me, and we were playing cards. And I remember, I think that night, at some point during the evening, I had two folks from AA show up at my house. And it was absolutely horrible because I spent that whole entire hour while they were visiting at the house walking around with water, acting like I hadn't been drinking during that time. And I was just hoping and praying that they would effing leave my home so I could get back to my drinking. It was a couple. Anyways, they eventually left, and I went back to my drinking and playing cards and having a good time. And I think at some point during the night there was like a beer run where I was, not very diplomatic to a guy at the 7-Eleven that I was trying to buy beer from, and consequently people like threw me back in my truck and was like, just let us buy the beer, Jen. Like, you really need not go in this next store that we go into. And I was just upset. But nothing happened major that evening, at least in the kind of major ways in which some of us know where drinking can take us on a nightly basis. And the next day was a Monday, and I called in sick to work, and I found the local, we have a club out here called Rebos Club, which it took me a good solid 10 years of sobriety to realize that was sober spelled backwards. And so anyways, Rebos Club had a noon meeting, and back then I had to print out the MapQuest directions on my printer and find my way down to that meeting. And I don't remember a whole lot from that meeting, but what I do remember is that there was a person in there that had drilled a hole through their chips, and they had all of their chips on a keychain. And I remember thinking that was cool. I just stuck out to me as a thing. But what I knew from that point forward was that I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I was gonna do a 90 and 90 no matter what. So I was working about 30 miles away. I had about an hour drive every morning, and I would stop. I would have an hour drive in the mornings to work. And then on the way back home in the evenings, I would need to stop halfway on that commute and go to school, because I was going to school. I was working full time. So my story such is that I spent 15 years going to school and working full time. And during that time, I was able to get a bachelor's and 2 master's degrees. And I say that because it is direct result of this program. So I am a native of Virginia. I cannot get either one of my parents outside of Virginia for, at least a good couple of hundred years or so. So Sparky's voice just sounds like home to me. And that's what I know. You need a little bit more valley in your accent, but that's fine. And as an only child growing up, I was a latchkey kid. I was by myself all the time. I never felt a part of. And by the time I started drinking at about the age of 12 or 13, my first drink was a cranberry juice and vodka I'd found underneath the sink. And that particular day, I think I immediately started drunk dialing to let everybody know how cool I was, that I was sitting in my home drinking cranberry juice and vodka. And I blacked out the first time that I drank. And I quickly learned how to cover up my drinking because that cranberry juice spilled all over my white eyelet bedspread. And I had to very promptly clean up that bedspread so that I could cover my tracks. And that's just the way it went. I ended up going up at a high school to a military academy. And about a year or so into my time there, I had a band director that called me down to his room one night and said, if you drink the way you play your music, you've got a problem. And all I heard was, you need to cover it up more. And that's what I did. But that ended up being the man who first planted the seed of AA with me. And, it took me 5 years to get 1 year. So like, I see a lot of folks tonight that are putting on that they've got 3 days and 24 days and 50 some days. And we've been seeing that, of course, throughout this time as we've been here, on 5D, seeing all these incredible folks decide to put down the drink and maybe try something different. And, I got a drunk in public one evening. I think like the Top Gun soundtrack was playing Wind Beneath My Wings, and a cop knocked on my, door of my truck and said, put your shirt on, and, consequently put handcuffs on me. And I had to go to jail. I think I jumped in my driver's seat, by the way, and tried to get away. So the fact that he didn't give me DWI was incredible. 1 week later, that same year, I was jumping a median strip out here on one of our major highways, and all of the hay that's in the median strip got stuck underneath the shaft of my truck, and I couldn't get out. I was so blacked out, I couldn't put my truck in four-wheel drive, and so I had like 3 troopers on me in a heartbeat. And, Jen was able to walk a straight line with the aid of her truck, was how it was written up in the report of the DWI. And, I got released on my own reconnaissance, but, that was on, that was on federal park police property. I was in a federal jurisdiction. I was attending a federal service academy, and, it was all this kind of stuff that I just had to pay my dues, to earn my seat in AA. And but even then, it wasn't enough to quit drinking. It wasn't enough to stop. I wanted to keep on hiding. I wanted to keep on trying to figure out a way to do this thing, because it was the only thing that I was the most passionate about. We used to sit around and plan out what the bar in my house was going to look like when I became an adult. And I used to plan out all the trips that I was going to take with my drinking buddies to exotic places, and all the things we were going to drink when we got to these exotic places, and all the great trips we were going to take to South America, or whatever the place was that we were dreaming about that night. Because I did get a chance to spend a little bit of time, in the city, which was New York City, because I was only a 20-minute train ride from there. And I got the chance to spend a little bit of time drinking in the city, and it was prestigious as an 18-year-old to be able to do that. I felt like a badass. And, I used to walk out of the academy gates in my civilian clothes with my beer bottles clinking in my backpack. And people would say, how did you do that, Jen? And I would say, you just act as if. And I learned how to act as if once I got sober, but I've been acting as if my whole life. I've been trying to fake it till I make it my whole life. Guys, I do not feel a part of most of the time. I'm either above you or below you. I'm never seeing eye to eye. It's taken me years to learn how to be a worker among workers and a person among persons. I didn't come in that way. I came in that very, very, very selfish and self-centered. What's our time look like? So how did that work? So let's see here. I had to do a stint of inpatient treatment. So I did 3 weeks of the National Institute of Health because I figured I would be written up in medical journals. Stupid. But you know what I mean? Like, it was so I got out of there and I thought, okay, now I can go back to school. And they're like, oh, no. You must go to a halfway house. You got to go to some transitional housing. I'm like, transitional housing? I'm not going to be around those kind of people. Are you kidding me? And I go to this transitional housing and I'm hanging out with folks that were going to meetings, and they were going to feelings groups, and I wasn't a part of any of that. I came in at curfew every night, never went to a meeting, did the bare minimum, and did it for 9 months. And I got called out in a feelings group one night, and I admitted that I had relapsed. And I thought we were going to be done with this transitional housing thing, and they sent me back to the very treatment center that was the full-blown 3-month inpatient treatment center that I had been avoiding all my life, that my mother had been putting pamphlets on my pillowcases for years about. And I went there, and I was able to stay dry for a year afterwards. But I made horrible choices. Like, I wasn't all in. I went to a Cocaine Anonymous meeting for an entire year and picked up all the keychains, even though I'd never done cocaine in my entire life. Didn't go to AA. I went to the very 12-step group that I had no reason to be around. And I found a sponsor in that Cocaine Anonymous meeting, and I ended up sleeping with her. You know what I mean? Come on. Like, we're not in. We're not in. And so 18 months into me being out of this rehab, in the midst of somebody saying, hey, I ended up drinking out of these 18 months, and I went back out and I did some controlled drinking, and it was horrible. And all it looked like when I say controlled drinking, for anybody who's new, is that I was going out there with a head full of 3 weeks at the National Institute of Health, and 8 weeks in inpatient treatment center, and 9 months in a feelings group for transitional housing. And that band director up there at the academy telling me about AA and about how I needed to quit my drinking if I played music the way I did. And I had all this head knowledge while I was bellied up to the bar. I had this head knowledge, and it is just a crappy buzz. It's a crappy buzz, knowing that every time I crossed the threshold, because I was a barroom drinker, so every time I crossed the threshold of the bars where I was drinking at, I knew I shouldn't be there. And that's all that 18 months of controlled drinking was. And I was doing it maybe once a week, once every 3 weeks, maybe once a month, and I did that. And really, at the end of that 18 months, what it brought me to is what I originally started out with, was that Sunday night at the end of that Thanksgiving weekend, after I turned 24 years old and was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Because up until that point, all the stuff that got me to that particular night, I'd already gone through all the hoops. I'd already gotten the DWIs, and I'd gotten the drunk in public. And I'd already, felt shame and remorse for my parents having to worry about me all the time. And, I was, letting go of the prestigious education that I never went back to. And, all of the things, which ended up being all of the sort of like little pile, the pile of yets, the pile of things that I did to earn my seat. And I know I have some yets in front of me, and I have some yets that I already checked off to get here, but that's what happened. So I do this 90 and 90, and I was really diligent about it. Like, I didn't pull 2 meetings one day and so I could go to school, or because I was too tired the next day. Like, I legitimately did it, and it was fun. Like, I remember one time I had to go to a 10 a.m. meeting with a bunch of old ladies just to get that 90 and 90. And I had to, I had one Sunday afternoon where I had to just like sit in a car with 3 other drunks because the church wasn't open that particular cold Sunday afternoon. But by golly, I got that 90 and 90. And really all that afforded me was a sponsor and a service and a home group and a service position. And so I had a sponsor at a Friday night meeting called Buck Hall, and I had a Tuesday night meeting where I made coffee. It's a 12 and 12 meeting. And that's what I did for essentially the first 3 years of my sobriety. And I just sort of hung on like that. And the only thing that first sponsor really did was she showed me the enterprise of AA. She showed me that there are assemblies and there's a general service board, and we carry our group's conscience as a GSR into various things. And I learned about the enterprise of it. I came out with like maybe a 5 or 6 page 4th step. And then I got to the point where I couldn't hear her anymore. Our sponsors are kind of worthless if we're not calling them, and our sponsors are kind of worthless if we're not able to hear them anymore. And I just couldn't hear her anymore. And so I really flailed for about 6 months at the end of those 3 years of sobriety. And it was a hard, dark place. I tried getting 2 other women to sponsor me, and I couldn't be honest with them about who I was, because at the end of the day, guys, I'm a left-handed lesbian alcoholic. And I don't want to tell you that, but that's what I am. And I didn't want to get honest about that because, you know, where I grew up, that wasn't okay. It's not accepted. It's not in the household in which I came from. The fabric of who I am and what I'm about, regardless of accomplishments, when stripped away, aren't okay. Because if I wasn't there to, you know, that's a whole nother story. But anyways, I had this alcoholism that kept me far away. It kept me not feeling a part of. And then I've got, you know, my own personal judgments that keep me also disconnected from the spirit and keep me from feeling like I'm lovable, is what it comes down to. And at the end of those 3 years of sobriety, when I got rid of my sponsor and I flailed around the dark for a good solid 6 months, there was a woman from Orange County, California that showed up here in Virginia who, where we come from here in Manassas, by the way, you know, meeting makers make it, which we all know is bullshit. That's not true, but that's what they say. And I've got guys with 30 years of sobriety that just gone to a meeting every single day of the last 30 years of their lives, and that's fine. That's all they've done. And I was like dying on the vine. And I sort of like, you know, courted this woman a little bit where I was just like, hey, you want to go walking sometime? Because I'm an avoidance addict. I don't have my voice. I can't talk to you. So you want to go walking sometime? Can I get your number? Can we go walking sometime? And I was going through a bunch of stuff with Mom, per usual. And she knew exactly what I was doing, thank goodness. And so she kept her boundaries, and I eventually ended up asking her to be my sponsor. And I've had the same sponsor the entire time since that time. So I guess we're working on however many years we're working on. That woman made it very clear. She said, hey, look, you know what? You're at my house once a week. We're going to use that time to go through the book line by line, you know, through the big book line by line. We're going to work the steps as they show up in the big book. You know, you're going to show up on time. You're not going to cancel on me because, you know, the time that I spend with you is the time that I'm taking away from my family. And we just went from there. And I don't recommend anybody do that, because at the same exact time I was watching her sponsor a woman who actually got a hold of her at 3 months of sobriety as opposed to 3 years of sobriety. And there was a tremendous difference. You know, I spent 3 years being batshit crazy because I hadn't gotten into the book yet. You know, you got to get into the solution. You got to get into the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was really just using AA as sort of a social club or a place to find a painter or a plumber or a good roofer. Like, it's not Angie's List. You know what I mean? Like, AA is not Angie's List. Like, it's not Home Advisor. You know, it's your life. And I didn't get that. And the fact that I didn't go back out is a miracle. And I absolutely was adding to my 8th step during those first 3 years of sobriety 100%, because I wasn't nice. And I wasn't treating God's kids like God's kids. Anyways, we go through the big book line by line. And we do all the things that we talk about in this meeting every single night. You know, in step 1, I'm going to write down exactly who I want God to be, and who my current God was. And she read it and she sent me home and she said, you're not going deep enough, do it again. And so I had to go home and I had to dig deeper on it. You know, I came back and I read it to her, and it was, you know, good enough for what I had at the moment. You know, in step 2, or in step 1, I had to write down my powerlessness, but in step 2, I was writing down what I needed God to be. In step 3, it was the first time that I genuinely, unequivocally had somebody grab my hand, tell me to get down on my knees, and we read the 3rd step prayer out loud from the big book that night. And I had spent the entire previous week thinking about the 3rd step, and it had never even occurred to me that after 3 comes 4, because I had spent that entire week thinking about making the decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood it. So here we pray, and I'm feeling this amazing feeling, and she's like, all right, now you're going to launch off into a course of vigorous action. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, this is just such a nice, precious moment. Like, I'm feeling so connected for the first time and so loved. Yep, now you're going to start writing. You're going to have a good time in this first part, because you're just going to write down all the people and all the bad things that they did to you, and you're going to write down all the things they affect. And then you're going to come back, and we're going to talk about part 2. And then we do part 3. and I'm in part 4. And guys, I will tell you, please don't repeat this. It took 18 months for me to do that 4th step. I should have been drunk 4 times over. I put everything in front of my 4th step except my 4th step. You know, other women took the God spot. Work took in front of the 4th step. I put school in front of the 4th step. I put everything in front of the 4th step. The 5th step for us took about a good 3 to 6 hours. My sponsor came over to my house. We sat there on the couch. She gave me some feedback. She left. She told me to do 6 and 7. I picked the phone up. I called her right back, and I said, "Hey, that one thing that I read, you really heard that, right?" She's like, "Jen, I totally heard it." I'm like, okay, because I just had a couple of things that I wanted to make sure were right, because I went from a 6-page 4th step with I don't know how many people to a 96-page journal that I filled up. I don't think since that time in my life I've ever filled up a journal except that one time in my life. 8, we had now, soon, and never. I had to take all those people on that 4th step list. I had to write down all the ones in which I was willing to do an amends now, the ones I was willing to do an amends to soon, and the ones that I was willing to do an amends to never. And the ones that were in that never column, I had to pray to move over into the soon, and I did that. I've done 9 steps. Probably the most important one that comes to mind is the one that I finally made my mind up on a Friday night. After I draft all of my 9 steps to my sponsor. She goes over them and spot checks them all, make sure we cover everything, make sure I'm not owning anything that I shouldn't be owning. And I had this 9th step ready. And on a Friday night after I left my home group, I was like, you know what? I'm going to go do this 9th step tomorrow morning. And so I went over to my mom's house. I brought her coffee. She was chatting, and I looked for the segue to give me the opening to possibly do this amends. And she started talking about a friend's son who was having a hard time with drugs and alcohol. And I said, oh, about that thing. If you have a moment now, I've got something I'd like to tell you. And the only person I've ever read my 9th step to was my mother, because I was afraid she wasn't going to hear me. And I left her with a copy of my 9th step, and I would never recommend anybody doing that, but I left her with a copy of that 9th step, and I don't regret it, because when she passed, that 9th step was taped with Scotch tape on her bedroom wall. So I knew that she had heard it. And at the end of it, when I said, do you have anything else? Do you have anything you want to add, anything you want to say? Her response was, I'm sorry I didn't protect you. And that was pretty good. That relationship was not golden by any means. I've got a thing here that I keep in my big book that says that while my mother wasn't the reason why I drank, she didn't give a good reason to stop either. So, but I buried her with no regrets as the result of this program, and the ability to hold her, to hold space for her and love her where she was at. It's not about me anymore. It wasn't about what I didn't get. It wasn't about what I did get. It was just, you get that freedom. And then, my 10th step, I got to tell you, my 6-year-old daughter is the receiver of my 10th step almost every freaking night. I mean, she just gets it. I got to do a 10th step with that one all the time. And, my 11th step, 10 years into my sobriety, I checked myself into an anger management program that was about 18 weeks long. And I was also meditating at the time. And what I found out with meditation is that my anger and when I'm meditating, anger doesn't seem to be able to exist. It's a lot thinner and it's a lot lighter. And it's sort of effervescent, my anger, when I'm meditating on a regular basis. And then my 12th step, I've definitely sponsored women. I walk into the big book the same way that I was walked through the big book. And that book, by the way, as a sponsor, just sort of takes you off the hook where, like, I don't have any answers. I'll tell you early and often I don't have any answers, but let's go see what the book has to say. And then I don't have to, it's not Jen's program. Let's go see what the book has to say. Because that's how I was sponsored. Every time I would walk into my sponsor's house with whatever bullshit problem I had going on, she would say, let's see what the book has to say. Let's see what the book says about that. And that's the way these years have been. let's see what the book has to say about that. It's not about me. And so I'm not going to tell you that I have all the answers. I can share with you my experience, but really, let's just go see what the book has to say about it. There's a whole lot of other stuff that's happened during that time. I've made a lot of really crappy decisions in my sobriety, like a lot of crappy decisions. I got myself involved in a marriage that I should have never gotten involved with. Um, and thank God that I had done the work so that I had a woman one time, right? At a couple of years into my marriage, I went and stayed with another gal in AA, and we were talking, and she's like, you know what, Jen? You got in this marriage sober, you're going to get out of this marriage sober. You got into this marriage with the 12 steps, you're going to get out of this marriage with the 12 steps. And thank God for that, because by virtue of having done the steps already and had done that meditation already and had already worked with women already, I knew how to get through a divorce. And people ask me all the time, they're like, well, how did you learn how to be a mom though? And I'm like, I sponsored women and I was sponsored. Like, that's the only way that I know. Those are the most intimate relationships and the most, loving relationships I've been in my life are my sponsor-sponsee relationships. I wasn't blessed with, everything I've learned in life has been through Alcoholics Anonymous, and letting ourselves off the hook and loving people where they're at and all these things. So I need to wrap it up, but I don't take 5D lightly, and I will be around for a while to come, regardless of what our future may bring. And the reason I say that is because I made a decision a couple of months back to make 5D my home group. And I did that after having had the same home group for the last 19 years of my sobriety. That, people knew that they were going to see Jen on a Friday night at 8:30. And life circumstances, not COVID stuff, but life circumstances in general haven't afforded me the ability to get out of the house at 8:30 on a Friday night. And so I couldn't be more grateful for 5D to show up when it did. And there is a piece about being amongst my peers, which is a little different, and it makes me a little bit vulnerable. And I absolutely love it. And I think it is absolutely exactly where I'm supposed to be for right now. So thank you so much, Christina, for asking me to share. And I really appreciate everyone who's, already been here when I came and has been here for a while. And I'm appreciative of all the people that have been coming on since I've been here.